The death of Tycho Brahe. Killed by his own bladder, or something far stranger, he was one of the most famous astronomers alive, dining at the table of Danish nobility, when his body simply refused to let him leave his seat. 11 days later, he was dead. For 400 years, everyone believed the official story. Then someone finally opened his coffin. Tycho Brahe spent the final decades of the 16th century as one of Europe's most celebrated and eccentric scientific minds, a Danish nobleman whose meticulous, unprecedented astronomical observations, made entirely with the naked eye decades before the invention of the telescope, would eventually provide the raw data Johannes Kepler needed to formulate the laws of planetary motion that underpin modern astronomy. Brahe himself was almost as famous for his personal eccentricities as his scientific achievements, having lost part of his nose in a sword duel with a fellow student years earlier over a mathematical disagreement, reportedly wearing a prosthetic replacement crafted from brass or silver for the remainder of his life, and famously keeping a pet elk that, according to contemporary accounts, died after drinking too much beer at a party and falling down a flight of stairs. In October of 1601, Brahe attended a formal banquet in Prague, hosted by a Bohemian nobleman, where, according to the most widely repeated historical account of his death, strict social etiquette of the era prevented him from leaving the table to relieve himself before the meal's most senior guest had done so, forcing Brahe to remain seated and increasingly uncomfortable for the duration of an extended formal dinner. By the time he finally returned home, he was reportedly unable to urinate at all, and over the following 11 days, his condition deteriorated steadily, marked by severe abdominal pain, fever, and delirium, until he died on October 24, 1601, at 54 years old. This account, repeated in historical records for centuries, painted the death of one of history's most significant astronomers as an almost absurd cautionary tale about the dangers of excessive courtly politeness, a bladder rupture, or severe urinary tract obstruction brought on entirely by social etiquette rather than any dramatic or sinister cause. For nearly 400 years, this remained the generally accepted historical explanation, repeated in biographies and scientific histories with little serious challenge. That explanation began seriously unraveling in the 20th century, when a persistent rumor, circulating quietly among historians for generations, gained renewed attention. The suggestion that Brahe hadn't died from an unfortunate bladder ailment at all, but had been deliberately poisoned. The primary suspect named in this theory was none other than Johannes Kepler himself, Brahe's own assistant and eventual scientific successor, who had worked closely with Brahe in his final years and stood to gain enormous professional advantage from his mentor's death, inheriting direct access to Brahe's meticulously recorded decades of astronomical data, the exact information Kepler needed to complete his own groundbreaking work on planetary orbits. The relationship between Brahe and Kepler had been documented, even during Brahe's lifetime, as professionally productive but personally strained, with Brahe reportedly guarding access to his complete astronomical data jealously, sharing it with Kepler only in limited, controlled portions rather than granting him full access, an arrangement that frustrated Kepler considerably given how directly his own theoretical work depended on Brahe's comprehensive observational records. Following Brahe's death, Kepler moved with what some historians have characterized as suspicious speed to secure control over Brahe's complete data archive, effectively gaining exactly the unrestricted access to decades of astronomical observations that Brahe had specifically withheld from him while alive. In 1901, 300 years after Brahe's death, his remains were exhumed for the first time, and preliminary examination of hair samples reportedly detected elevated levels of mercury, a substance historically used in some medicinal treatments of the era, but also a known and effective poison findings that lent some initial credibility to the poisoning theory circulating among historians. This finding remained inconclusive and heavily debated for decades, given the genuine possibility that mercury exposure could have resulted from legitimate period-appropriate medical treatments Brahe may have received during his final illness rather than deliberate poisoning. The question was re-examined with considerably more scientific rigor in 2010, when Brahe's remains were exhumed a second time by a team of Danish and Czech researchers employing modern forensic toxicology techniques unavailable to earlier investigators. This more thorough analysis found mercury levels in Brahe's remains that, while elevated, were determined to be insufficient to have caused fatal poisoning, effectively ruling out acute mercury poisoning as the specific cause of death and lending renewed, though not absolute, support back towards the original account of a urinary or kidney-related ailment as the genuine medical cause of death, rather than the deliberate poisoning theory that had gained such persistent traction over the preceding century. Despite this more definitive modern forensic conclusion, the poisoning theory has never been entirely extinguished from popular historical discussion, partly because the specific medical mechanism behind the traditional bladder rupture account remains somewhat medically disputed among modern physicians examining the original historical description of his symptoms, and partly because the genuinely suspicious timing of Kepler's rapid acquisition of Brahe's data following his death continues to strike many historians and casual observers alike as a compelling, if ultimately circumstantial, motive that modern forensic evidence has not entirely disproven, even if it has significantly undermined the specific mercury poisoning theory itself. What makes Tycho Brahe's death endure as a genuinely unresolved historical curiosity, even after two separate forensic exhumations conducted centuries apart, is the uncomfortable reality that modern science has successfully ruled out one specific theory of his death, without definitively confirming precisely what did happen instead, leaving open the lingering, unsettling possibility that one of the most significant scientific minds in European history may have died from something other than an overly polite refusal to leave a dinner table, at the hands of the very protégé history would eventually credit with completing his life's work. 400 years later, Brahe's own meticulously recorded observations of the night sky remain foundational to modern astronomy, an enduring scientific legacy built on data that his own possibly resentful successor may have been in considerably more of a hurry to acquire than history initially assumed. If stories like this, where even a death forensically examined twice still can't fully rule out foul play, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.